Hello, everybody. So it's a pleasure to present this prestigious award, recognizing 10 theses of highest caliber. Our jury, conforming of, let me read all the names: Claudio Capelli, Andrew Narracott, Michael Neely, Maria Jose Gomez, Eva Casoni, and myself. So we evaluated all the submissions with great care. And while all, let's say, showcased an excellence quality, but we unanimously selected Anna's thesis as the clear winner. So her thesis or her work stood out across all the aspects, different aspects that we need to evaluate. Let's say scientific questions addressing the PhD, technologies used or developed there, research results, including novelty and impact. Also, research outputs generated from PhD. And finally, future steps. So, congratulations, Anna, and the stage is yours.
Thank you, and thank you for the nice introduction. I'm honored to be here today and for the prize I have been awarded. So today I will talk about multiscale modeling of vascular adaptation processes using adjoint-based models. Okay, I start by introducing the clinical background and by saying that my research mainly focused on peripheral artery disease and in particular on superficial femoral arteries. However, the computational approach that I will show you, as I will explain today, is very flexible, so it can be applied to other vascular regions and to study also other vascular pathologies besides the one that I will show you today. So peripheral artery disease is a chronic occlusive pathology that represents the third cause of vascular morbidity, and the lower limb arteries, and especially the superficial femoral artery, are among the vessels that are mostly affected by peripheral artery disease. If it is not treated, this pathology may become a disabling condition, and it is also associated with increased risk of other cardiovascular diseases, so an increased risk of morbidity and mortality. This pathology is associated with the insurgence of atherosclerosis that implies, as we can see here, the formation of an atherosclerotic plaque in the arterial wall, leading to progressive lumen narrowing and impaired blood supply. Atherosclerosis is a multifactorial disease that is characterized by complex network of events that involve, among others, the accumulation of low-density lipoproteins in the intima, which in turn triggers an inflammatory cascade and alteration of vascular cell activities. And the disturbed hemodynamics play a role in the formation of atherosclerotic plaques by affecting the transport of atherogenic species as low-density lipoproteins and by promoting a condition that is known as endothelial dysfunction, which in turn contributes to the atherogenic events. Depending on the patient and lesion characteristics, the treatment can be surgical or endovascular. In particular, among the endovascular techniques, there are two widely adopted approaches that are the percutaneous transluminal angioplasty that we can see here, which implies the insertion and expansion of a polymeric balloon, or the self-expanding stent implantation that in many cases also require a preliminary angioplasty procedure. Although being the preferred treatment at the femoral artery level, these procedures suffer from a 1-year primary patency rate of about 60%. And one of the main responsible of the intervention failure is restenosis that consists in the partial total occlusion of the lumen as consequence of different systemic, biological, and biomechanical factors. In particular, among the biomechanical factors, both the arterial wall damage induced by the expansion of the balloon and the disturbed hemodynamics due, for example, to the presence of the stent strut play a great role. Indeed, as we can see here, both the arterial wall injury and the flow disturbance may lead to an inflammatory response with subsequent smooth muscle cell activation, so increased migration and proliferation that produce neointima hyperplasia and eventually restenosis. And moreover, the flow disturbance may have also a secondary effect on the smooth muscle cell activity through the direct modulation of the endothelial function. So we can see that both atherosclerosis and restenosis are complex multifactorial multiscale vascular adaptation processes governed by a network of heterogeneous and interconnected mechanisms. Here, for example, we can see that the biomechanical factors at the tissue level, as the arterial wall damage and hemodynamics, may influence molecular pathways by determining, for example, a perturbation of the expression profile of genes or of the transport of chemicals, which in turn may affect cellular activities, as, for example, cell mitosis, apoptosis, or extracellular matrix production degradation, which in turn lead to arterial wall remodeling and so a subsequent alteration of the arterial biomechanics. However, the complete understanding of the complex mechanism that underlie these vascular pathologies is lacking. And in this context, several computational models have been developed to support the study of the mechanobiological mechanism underlying arterial wall remodeling and vascular adaptation processes. Most of the computational studies in the literature adopt either a continuum or a discrete approach and mainly focus on one single aspect of this complex process. For example, continuum approaches are usually adopted to evaluate the mechanical behavior or the hemodynamics at the tissue level, or for example, to describe transport processes and transport mechanism at the molecular level, while discrete approaches are usually used to describe cellular activities, as for example, using algebra-based models. However, our idea is that in order to capture the intrinsic multiscale and multifactorial nature of this process, we need to combine continuum approaches with discrete approaches into a hybrid multiscale mechanobiological models. So the focus of my research was to develop a multiscale agent-based modeling framework of vascular adaptation that integrates continuum and discrete modeling approaches in a systems biology perspective. So in our framework, continuum models are adopted at the tissue scale, while a discrete model is used at the cell scale. In particular, continuum models are used to simulate hemodynamics and mass transport using computational fluid dynamics simulations, and to evaluate the arterial wall stress or the arterial wall damage during the expansion procedure using structural mechanics simulations. Moreover, at the cellular scale, cellular activities are simulated using an agent-based model. So in agent-based models, the system of interest is simulated through a bottom-up approach in which the components that are called agents are autonomous decision-making elements. And we can see here, for an example of a bidimensional agent-based model representative of a vessel cross-section, which is implemented on an hexagonal grid. In particular, as we can see here, the cross-section is composed by intima, media, and adventitial layer, and is populated by cells and extracellular matrix agents. And to simulate the behavior of cells and extracellular matrix agents, probabilistic rules are assigned that may depend on environmental factors, as for example, the hemodynamics, the arterial wall stress or damage, or inflammation, or transport of chemicals, and so on, and also may depend on other agent activities. So here we can see an example of agent activities as cell mitosis, apoptosis, or extracellular matrix production degradation. And in particular, we can see that cell mitosis and extracellular matrix production implies the inclusion of a new agent in the domain, while cell apoptosis and extracellular matrix degradation, the removal of the agent from the grid. So in the end, the behavior of the system emerges from the agent actions, the interactions, and the mutual influence with the external environment in line with the system's biology principles. So the developed agent-based modeling framework was used to study different vascular adaptation processes in the femoral arteries, and in particular, atherosclerosis, restenosis following angioplasty procedure, and in-stent restenosis. Starting with atherosclerosis, we developed a multiscale agent-based modeling framework that investigates the role of hemodynamics and LDL mass transport in the process of atherosclerotic plaque formation and progression. And to do this, we coupled computational fluid dynamic simulations with the agent-based model of cellular dynamics. So here we can see the framework. So the framework receives as input a three-dimensional model of healthy superficial femoral artery and generates as output a model of disease atherosclerotic vessel. In particular, the framework is composed of two modules that are the hemodynamics and LDL transport module at the tissue second scale and the tissue remodeling module at the cell days scale. So within the hemodynamics module, the three-dimensional model of the superficial femoral artery that we can see here, for example, is meshed as if this simulation with simulation of mass transport is performed, and the Washout stress and LDL at the lumen surface are computed. In particular, these variables, so the Washout stress and the LDL concentration, are extracted at selected cross sections, as we can see here. And for each cross-section, a bidimensional agent-based model simulates arterial wall remodeling as function of the local Washout stress and the LDL concentration. So at the end of the agent-based model simulation, a new geometry is reconstructed. So the framework was applied to idealized superficial femoral artery geometry with realistic curvature and tortuosity for a follow-up time of 2 months of simulations. So going deeper into the details, we can see here the details of the hemodynamics module. So we can see that a tetrahedral mesh was generated with 30 boundary layers of prism elements. And in particular, a very refined grid was necessary in this case to capture the local transport phenomena close to the lumen surface. So after matching the domain, steady state safety simulation was performed, and both the Washout stress and the concentration of low density lipoprotein was computed and extracted at the selected cross sections. So for each cross-section, a bidimensional agent-based model was generated, as shown here for an explanatory case, in which we can see the block in yellow, the intima in blue, the median green, and the adventitia in red. And the agent-based model simulates the arterial wall remodeling and plaque formation by implementing lipid and cellular activities, in particular lipid infiltration in the intima, cell mitosis, apoptosis, and extracellular matrix production and degradation. So these activities are function of the two input of interest that in this case are the Washout stress input and the LDL input. So these inputs were modeled, as we can see, with a logistic curve in which a high heterogenic input was assigned to low Washout stress regions and regions of high LDL concentration. So in this way, the probability of lipid accumulation increase in regions of high LDL concentration and low Washout stress, and the probability of cell mitosis and extracellular matrix production increase in regions of low Washout stress and high content of lipids into the intima. So if we look at the results, we have here 3 explanatory planes, and we can see their evolution along the 2 months of simulation. We can see that in all the planes, the inputs trigger an heterogenic process with plaque formation and increased intimal growth. And we can observe that the lipid accumulation that is shown here in yellow occur at the regions of high LDL input, so in coherence with the simulated rules. And moreover, we can observe that all the planes experience a similar lumen area change that is characterized by a 75% of lumen stenosis at 2 months. Moreover, we can also appreciate that the evolution of the planes is characterized by a two-phase remodeling. In particular, we have an initial outward remodeling characterized by an initial enlargement of the external diameter while preserving the lumen area, followed by an inward remodeling in which the main stenosis occur. This remodeling is also known as Glagov remodeling, and as we can see here, our framework was able to capture the experimental data obtained in this study, in which in up to 40% of stenosis, there is a very slight lumen area change, while after the 40% of stenosis, we have the real inward remodeling. And finally, the framework was able to capture the formation of a spiral plaque that we can see here in the three-dimensional model reconstruction that is mainly localized in the regions of high LDL concentration. So the framework, then we can move to the second application, that is the application of the framework to a model of restenosis following angioplasty procedure. And this framework was used to investigate the role of the intervention-induced arterial wall damage and altered hemodynamics on cellular activities and subsequent restenosis. And to do this, we coupled a finite element simulation of the angioplasty procedure with computational fluid dynamics and an agent-based model of cellular dynamics. So the framework is similar to the one shown before, but it was here adapted to simulate this specific condition. So the framework receives as input a three-dimensional model of diseased superficial femoral artery and generates as output a three-dimensional model of post-intervention follow-up geometry. The framework is composed by three modules in this case, an angioplasty and hemodynamics module at the tissue second scale, and a tissue remodeling module at the cell daisy scale. So the angioplasty module performs the finite element simulation of the angioplasty procedure, so it computes the post-intervention geometry and the damage induced by the intervention procedure. And the hemodynamics module performs the computational fluid dynamics, so it computes the washer stress in the post-intervention geometry. And finally, the tissue remodeling module simulates the arterial wall remodeling through an agent-based model and then reconstructs the post-intervention geometry. The framework was applied in this case for a follow-up time of 3 months, and at each month, the hemodynamics module and the tissue remodeling module are bidirectionally coupled so that the hemodynamics is updated in the form vessel geometry, and also the input to the cellular activities is also updated. So we can see that the framework was applied to an idealized diseased vessel geometry that we can see here at the top with an asymmetric plaque that is shown in yellow. So within the angioplasty module, we performed the finite element simulation of the angioplasty procedure, and the tissue layers were the material properties were simulated as isotropic hyperelastic materials with specific properties derived from experimental data on human superficial femoral arteries. And moreover, a damage mechanism was included in the simulation of the angioplasty procedure in order to simulate the level of damage that each intima layer, each intima element achieved during the expansion procedure. So here we can see that the balloon expansion induced a mild damage that was mainly localized close to the plaque. Then the hemodynamics was computed in the post-intervention geometry, as we can see here, through a steady-state computational fluid dynamics simulation, and the washer stress was extracted at the selected cross-sections. Then again, within the tissue remodeling module, for each cross-section, a bidimensional agent-based model that we can see here simulates the post-intervention arterial wall remodeling, so the process of restenosis, as function of both the washer stress input and the damage input. So while the washer stress input was the same as shown before, so with a logistic curve that simulates high input in case of low washer stress, the damage input was formulated as the product of the local level of damage that is computed through the finite element simulation with an inflammatory curve derived from literature, which presents a peak in the first postoperative days, followed by a progressive decay up to 1 month of follow-up. So in this case, increased probability of cell mitosis and extracellular matrix reduction are simulated in case of low washer stress and high damage levels. So we can see here the results of this specific framework, and we can see that the greatest intimal growth was observed in the regions of low washer stress and high level of damage. In particular, the planes that experience the greatest lumen renarrowing are plane 10 and plane 15. While plane 10 is subjected to high damage, plane 15 is exposed to very low washer stress. Moreover, we can see that the framework was able to capture the long-term mutual interaction between hemodynamics and arterial remodeling. Indeed, we can see that the hemodynamics at day 0, so immediately after the intervention, drive the arterial remodeling up to 1 month follow-up. Then the remodeled geometry led to the alteration of the hemodynamics at 1 month, and this in turn drives the arterial remodeling up to month 2, and so on. At the end of the 3 months, the framework simulated a 27% of restenosis that was in line with experimental observation in femoral arteries. Moreover, as we can see here, the framework replicated a 3-phase remodeling process characterized by a high lumen area change in the first postoperative month, followed by a stabilization of the lumen area and a focal restenosis occurring at 3 months, and this was similar to what observed in stented superficial femoral arteries. To show potential application of this framework was also applied to a patient-specific superficial femoral artery, as we can see here, with only one minor change in the finite element simulation of the angioplasty. That was the fact that in this case we consider the element deletion strategy, meaning that the elements that reached a given damage of 0.8 were removed from the mesh in order to simulate the potential dissections occurring during the expansion procedure. So here we can see the results of the framework applied to this case with the damage map, the washer stress map in the post-intervention configuration, and the damage and washer stress input at 3 selected planes with their evolution along 2 months of follow-up. And in particular, we can see also the same consideration that were done before, so the fact that an increased intimal growth occurs at the regions of high damage input and high washer stress input. Moreover, the framework was used to explore, for example, how is different the response of the artery in case of a balloon that is expanded up to 5 millimeters or to 6 millimeters of diameter. In particular, we can see that in the case B, that is the case of larger expansion, there is a greater lumen area immediately after the intervention. However, at 2 months, the lumen area of the 2 cases is very similar. This means that the larger expansion during the procedure produce a higher damage, so a higher inflammation, and leading to a higher restenosis that produce a similar lumen area change at 2 months. So we finally move to another application, that is the application of the multiscale agent-based framework to the case of in-stent restenosis. In this case, the framework was used to investigate the role of intervention-induced altered hemodynamics and monocyte gene expression on cellular activities and subsequent in-stent restenosis by coupling computational fluid dynamics with the agent-based model of cellular activities. So in this study, we considered 2 stented superficial femoral arteries of a patient who underwent self-expanding stent implantation. We can see here the 2 arteries with the left SFA that presented a short lesion treated with a single device, while the right SFA of the patient presenting a very long lesion that was treated with 2 overlapping devices. So first, we implemented the framework and by adapting the already presented framework to the case of a patient-specific artery to study in central stenosis. Then we perform a short-term study in which the framework was applied to the left SFA up to 1 month of follow-up. And finally, we considered a long-term study in which the framework was applied to both the left and the right SFA up to 1 year of follow-up. So as regards the framework, in this case, the framework receives as input the patient-specific three-dimensional stented superficial femoral artery geometry, the blood velocity waveform, and the monocyte gene expression, and generates as output a three-dimensional arterial lumen geometry at the desired follow-up time. In this case, the framework is composed by the cyclic coupling of the hemodynamics module and the tissue remodeling module. So within the hemodynamics module, CFD simulations are performed and the Washer stress are computed, while in the tissue remodeling module, the bidimensional algebra-based model simulates central stenosis as function of the Washer stress and the gene expression data. And then at each month, the geometry is reconstructed and the 2 modules are bidirectionally coupled. So starting with the patient-specific inputs, the patient-specific geometry of the lumen geometries were reconstructed from CT images at baseline, meaning immediately after the intervention, and at 1 month, 6 months, and 1 year after the intervention. Then the stents were implanted in the lumen vessels, in the lumen geometries using morphing procedure. So the stented baseline models were used to initialize the framework, while the 1 month, 6 months, and 1 year geometries were used to calibrate and validate the framework. Then the blood velocity waveform was derived from Doppler ultrasound images and was used for CFD simulations. And finally, to understand how to use the patient-specific gene expression data, we performed the following analysis. So monocyte gene expression was measured in 14 patients who underwent femoral angioplasty and stenting, and blood was collected at 5 time points preoperatively and at 4 time points after the intervention. So the expression level of about 35,000 genes was measured. Then, in order to understand which genes drive the remodeling process and contribute to restenosis, we applied a clustering algorithm to identify the genes that are most likely associated with the outcome, that is the 1 year success or failure. So from the initial 35,000 genes, we finally obtained 3 clusters that are shown here, containing 22 genes. And we can see that these clusters of genes present genes that are differentially expressed between the success and failure group, with the success group in green and the failure group in red. So we understand that these genes are the ones that mainly drive the restenosis process. So for this patient, we consider the genes of these 3 clusters as driver in our multiscale model. So going deeper into the modules, we can see here within the hemodynamics module that we perform a polyhedral mesh with the 5 boundary layers of prism elements, and we perform a steady-state computational fluid dynamic simulations and compute the Washer stress specifically in the region of interest, that is the stented portion. So in these regions, we selected some cross-sections that were used to initialize the algebra-based model. So for each cross-section, we generated a bidimensional algebra-based model that we can see here, with the difference that here we have the stent struts in red. And the algebra-based model simulates the progressive restenosis as function of the Washer stress input and the patient-specific gene expression input. We can see in particular that the gene expression input is characterized by a peak in the first 7 days after the intervention, followed by a decay up to 1 month. So it is characterizing of the inflammatory response of the patient. So in this case, the probability of cell mitosis and extracellular matrix production increase in regions of low Washer stress and in case of a very high inflammatory level, so in case of high gene expression input. So as I said, this framework was first applied to a short-term study in which we consider 1 month of follow-up. Indeed, in the first post-operative month is the most dynamic one that is mostly characterized by the higher lumen area change and the highest restenosis. So we use this first month to better understand the underlying mechanism of the framework and to calibrate the framework. So to do this, we developed two surrogate models of the tissue remodeling module, and in particular of the lumen area and the matrix to cell ratio. And after being validated, the surrogate models were used to perform a sensitivity analysis and to calibrate the algebra-based model parameters. So starting with the surrogate models, first lighting hypercube sampling was combined with Gauss process surrogate modeling to formulate two surrogate models of the tissue remodeling module that can provide an estimate of the 1 month patient lumen area and matrix to cell ratio. So to train these surrogate models, we first generated 60 samples through 60 combinations of the 6 algebra-based model parameters. So we obtain 60 arterial configuration at 1 month that we can see here, for which we computed the lumen area that is shown in red and the matrix to cell ratio that is shown in blue. So these samples were used to train the two surrogate models. So the surrogate models receive as input the algebra-based model parameters and provide as output an estimate of the lumen area and the matrix to cell ratio. The surrogate models were validated with the leave one out principle, and we can appreciate the perfect alignment between the predicted values and the simulated values for both the lumen area and the matrix to cell ratio. So after being validated, the surrogate models were used to perform an extensive sensitivity analysis in order to investigate the role of the algebra-based model parameters and their relationship with the model output, and in particular the lumen area. So as we can see here from the results, for example, the Walsh stress-related parameters have a larger impact on the lumen area with respect to the gene expression-related ones. And in all the cases, an increase in the parameter leads to an increase in cell mitosis and extracellular matrix production, so leading to a decrease in the lumen area. The surrogate models were then used to calibrate the framework, and in particular the 6 algebra-based model parameters using a genetic algorithm optimization. So the optimization consisted in minimizing the difference between the patient and the predicted lumen area, while maintaining a matrix to cell ratio within a desired range. So here we can see the results of the calibrated framework up to 1 month. In particular, all the planes, as we can see here, experience a similar lumen area change up to 25% of lumen area reduction at 1 month. And all the planes are characterized by an homogeneous intimal growth due to the small variability of the Walsh stress in the stented portion. At the end of the 1 month of simulation, the geometry was reconstructed, as we can see here, and it was compared with the patient follow-up data. We can see that the model provided an excellent estimation of the patient lumen area at 1 month, as we can see both from the geometrical reconstructions and from the box plot. Indeed, no significant differences were found between the patient and the model lumen area at 1 month, while in both cases a significant lumen area reduction was found with respect to the condition immediately after stenting. So the framework was then applied for a long-term study. So we applied the framework to both the left and the right SFAKs up to 1 year of follow-up. And to do this, first we needed to recalibrate the framework by considering not only the data at 1 month, but also the data at 6 months. And then it was applied up to 1 year of follow-up. So to recalibrate the framework, we considered the 60 samples that we generated at 1 month. And from this, we selected only the admissible cases that are the ones that satisfy the condition on the matrix to cell ratio at 1 month and are shown here in the yellow band. So 16 cases were evaluated as admissible, and for these 16 cases, the framework was run up to 6 months of follow-up. So here we can see the results in terms of lumen area of the 16 cases. So we can see the 1 month and the 6 month lumen area. And in particular, the case 38 was the optimal case because it minimized the difference between the patient and the model lumen area, both at 1 month and 6 months. So the framework was run by considering the algebra model parameter values of the case 38 up to 1 year of follow-up in both the left and the right SFA cases. So here we can see the results in both in the stented arteries up to 1 year of follow-up. In particular, we see the evolution of the planes at 1 month, 6 months, and 1 year. And we can see that all the planes are characterized by a similar lumen area trend over time that is characterized by the highest lumen area change occurring in the first postoperative month, followed by a stabilization of the lumen area up to 1 year of follow-up. And moreover, also in this case, the growth was characterized by an homogeneous pattern due to the small variability of the washer stress. So the geometries were then reconstructed at 1 month, 6 months, and 1 year of follow-up, and compared with the patient follow-up data. So as we can see here, both from the geometrical reconstructions and from the box plot, the model was able to capture the significant lumen area reduction occurring at 1 month, and also the overall lumen area trajectory from baseline to 1 year of follow-up. Indeed, also no statistical differences were found between the patient and the model lumen area, also at 6 months and 1 year of follow-up. What we can notice is that the framework is characterized by a smaller lumen area dispersion, especially at 1 year of follow-up compared to the patient one. And we can see this also from the geometrical reconstruction, in which we can notice that the framework was not fully able to capture the local geometrical variability, but it was able to capture the overall median lumen area trajectory. Similar results were found also for the right SFA case. So the framework was provided an excellent estimation of the patient lumen area at 1 month, and also a good estimation of the overall median lumen area trajectory up to 1 year of follow-up. However, it was not fully able to describe the local geometrical variability. The framework was useful also for this case to put in light the fact that there are additional factors that play a role in this local phenomena, in these local remodeling processes. So coming to the conclusion, I've shown potential applications and the potentialities of this multiscale agent-based modeling framework to simulate different kind of vascular adaptation processes. The framework is a hybrid. Indeed, it combines continuum and discrete modeling strategies. It is modular because it is able to, it can be initialized with different kind of data depending also on the data availability, and it also integrates different software, and it is fully automated. It was able to reproduce relevant features of the remodeling processes during atherosclerosis and restenosis following endovascular procedures in both idealized and patient-specific cases. In particular, within the idealized cases, the results were in line with clinical and experimental observations, while in patient-specific case, the framework was able to predict the patient lumen area trajectory along 1 year of follow-up. So to conclude, the framework have high potential to simulate the complex network of mechanobiological processing in arterial remodeling in systems biology perspective, and it can also be applied to other vascular regions and vascular adaptation phenomena. For example, we are now adapting the framework to simulate in-stent restenosis in coronary arteries following drug-eluting stent implantation. So to demonstrate the fact that we can include also additional phenomena as drug transport, and we can adapt the framework also to other vascular regions. I would like to thank all the people that contributed to this research from Politecnico di Milano, Politecnico di Torino, Houston Methodist Hospital, and University of Florida. And I thank you all for your attention. am available in case you have some questions.
Some help technique. Now. Okay, perfect. Okay, thank you, Anna, again. And I don't know if someone here has comments or questions. Okay, the first one here.
Thank you. I thought that was a really interesting talk. I'm just curious, your agent-based model, when you run the update for the hemodynamics, is that an update daily? Like, what's the time scale by which the model is updated?
Muted?
Anna, have you heard the question?
Vale, okay. But we are muted, but yeah, in the Zoom, right? Yes. Which is ours. Vale.
Hola, hola.
Now?
Okay.
Okay.
Hi, can you hear this time?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Sorry to everyone in the room. So the agent model updates the geometry for the hemodynamics. I'm just wondering about how frequently you run that update and whether there's any sensitivity of the final result to whether you update every day, every 2 days, something like this.
Yes, thank you for the nice question. We perform a sensitivity analysis that was important, especially for the stent restenosis cases, because the presence of the stent was the main determinant of the flow disturbance. What we noticed was that to introduce a change in the hemodynamics that was observed also from the side of the agent-based model, so the fact that the agent-based model was sensitive to an hemodynamic change, we needed the stent strut to be covered. Otherwise, the flow disturbance was more or less the same as the initial case, so the one immediately after the intervention. So we observed that more or less at 1 month, by calibrating the model, all the stent struts were covered, so that at that moment there was an enough significant change in the hemodynamics so that the agent-based model could respond to this change. Otherwise, an earlier coupling was not so meaningful because the agent-based model response was pretty much the same as with the previous input. So we consider that change in the geometry to be significant for a change in the hemodynamics and a subsequent change in the agent-based model response.
Okay, thank you. Just one more question, if I'm allowed. What boundary conditions are you using for your hemodynamic model?
Yes, we considered the parabolic velocity profile as input that was adapted. So in case of the patient-specific models, we considered the velocity profile deriving from Doppler ultrasound images, while in case of the idealized model, we considered literature-derived flow, and always with a parabolic velocity profile, and then we consider reference pressure as output in the outlet, and no slip condition at the walls.
Okay, thank you.
I don't know if someone wants to comment. Okay.
So, hi, thanks for the very nice talk. I had actually a question out of curiosity. You showed the very nice example of the train of stents. How did you model the overlapping? Because, well, you could have, I think, from memory, 2 scenarios, like either, well, if they perform the second angioplasty, the wall will be more damaged, or there will be a thickness in correspondence of the overlap. Can you just expand a little more about that? Thank you.
Yes. Thank you for the question. So first of all, we did not simulate through finite element simulation the expansion of the stent, but we considered a morphing procedure. So we didn't expand the stent, but we reconstructed the stent that were perfectly superimposed on the lumen surfaces. So there was not an expansion procedure simulated through finite element simulation, and so we didn't have the computation of damage and so on. This was because our geometries were completely occluded previous to the intervention, and so we didn't have the pre-operatively intervention in which we could expand the stent. So what we had was just the post-intervention geometry with the stent in place. So what we did was to simulate with a morphing procedure the expansion of the stent and to check that the expansion was in line with the real configuration, the real post-operative configuration. So what we did was first implant the first stent and then superimpose and expand the second stent with the superimposition as shown in the images. So we use the images as reference to implant the stent.
Okay, online, but I can see the comments. Could you show, please, the...
Or is there any question online? Just unmute yourself and
yes,
and ask.
please. I have other questions, just in the meantime. Considering the movement of the stent with the other application without the stent, did you consider the possibility to evaluate the fluid structure interaction with the walls in the artery, or perhaps it's not so significant at that level?
Yes, this is a nice question. So it could be interesting to evaluate also fluid structure interaction. In our cases, we decide to consider the two input separately because, I mean, not to add too much complexity in the framework, we decided to use standard CFD simulation to have an accurate evaluation of the wall shear stress, and only in the case, for example, in which we have the computation of damage, we did not consider the evaluation of the stress throughout the simulated months, but the arterial wall stress was the input only at M0, because we considered that the greatest input was the one at the expansion during the expansion, rather than the evolution of the arterial wall stress after the intervention. So we decided to perform only the finite element simulation at the expansion procedure, and to consider as trigger of the restenosis only the level of damage at that time. So for that reason, we thought that the fluid structure interaction was not the best modeling strategy to simulate the expansion and to capture the level of damage. While it could be useful to substitute the subsequent computational fluid dynamic simulations, so after the simulation of the expansion procedure, with the fluid structure interaction models, but it could be a future development in this case.
Right. And considering the mass transport, because as far as I understood, you need to evaluate based on some concentrations in the blood, so when you perform the CFD. But in the scheme, based on slide 7, if I don't remember wrong, this mass, it's at the molecular level. And my doubt is this the problem that coexisting the walls at the tissue levels that produce this damage? Or perhaps, I mean, the interaction in the walls when you transport the lipids and other species, no? How do you evaluate where exactly is deposited or how this is accumulated in the walls?
Okay, yes. So the model that included the mass transport, the lipid transport, was the atherosclerosis model, in which we only simulated the CFD with mass transport. So the advection diffusion equation were included in the CFD model, so were simulated in the context of the CFD model. So by including a solute in the equation. And so the deposition was the result of the CFD simulation. So as consequence of the diffusion advection equations. So I don't know if this is the answer of the question.
No, it just I was wondering an alternative approach considering Lagrangian transport, if you know exactly the particles dissolved there, which perhaps improve accuracy in this.
Okay. Yes,
questions.
it could be. It could be an alternative solution. Yes.
Okay, and considering the question about the cross sections or slides, how do you choose this discretization, the position of that or the distance or whatever?
Yeah, thank you. So also in this case, we perform a sensitivity analysis on the spatial discretization, and we so the computational time required for each cross section is quite long because we need more or less 1 day to simulate 1 month. So of course, if we increase the number of cross sections, we increase the computational time. So we decided to consider a spatial discretization that was enough to reconstruct the vessel geometry at the follow-up time, at the desired follow-up time. This was in case of the atherosclerosis and restenosis. So without the stent was simpler, while in case of the with the stent strut, we consider 1 cross section every 2 stent strut as the trade-off for computational time and accuracy of the reconstruction.
Thank you. Oops. Okay, Jerome.
Yeah, no, thank you very much for the talk, and again, congratulations on this fantastic achievement. My question is, it's just to close a bit the debate. So some companies now are proposing finite element solutions. So in order to simulate stent deployment and possible problems of restenosis, or calculate in coronary arteries fractional flow reserves to assess then the risk of atherosclerosis. So these are products on the market. How would you position then what you have done compared to that? Would you view exploitation relatively soon, or do you see it mostly for research by the time being? And if you can visualize a possible transfer of technology, what would be the next challenges?
Okay, thank you for the question. What I think is that this kind of models, as they are not for, they're more suitable for base research. They were developed to go deeper in the analysis of the mechanobiological mechanism rather than provide a tool for example, a tool for pre-planning of the operation and so on. So the aim was the one of making some hypotheses of interactions of mechanobiological mechanism and try to validate these hypotheses to gain more insight in the mechanobiological mechanism that drive these vascular processes. So what I can see is that they can maybe used to test I don't know, drugs that can affect some cellular activities, and so they can block the restenosis process and so on. And this is what, for example, we are doing now with the model of instant restenosis following drug elution. So we are seeing how the different drug concentration levels can affect the restenosis process. But the main thing is that what we want to simulate is the mechanobiological processes, and so try to make some hypotheses and see if we can find some relationship between these players in this complex framework. If we want to move further, what we need, I don't think that this level of accuracy in the, for example, in the geometrical characteristics as the local remodeling are so important in terms of clinical, in terms of market. So what we should do is maybe decrease this level of accuracy in favor of faster computational time, and so move to surrogate models of this kind of approach.
Okay, thanks.
Or question? No. So thank you again, Anna Corti, and congratulations for this fantastic job. And another, that's it, no? Un aplauso.
Thank you all.
Thank you, and thank you again then to Bea and to the great work of all the reviewers who spend a lot of time reviewing many PhD theses. Okay, so then we're moving then to the next step in the agenda, which are the hands-ons. So you all know in each hands-ons you're going. They are numbered. May I ask the instructors to go in front, to come in front of the scene, so that you can visually spot the people you will work with? ¿Perdón? No, se hacen en las salas. Okay. Sorry, I was talking to you in Catalan. Yeah. So too many languages.
Unfortunately, Spanish is not one of them.
Right, let me check then the room stuff. Okay, here we go. So, hands-on one. Yes. So, hands-on one. So, you go with Andreu and Maria, and you go in room 44003. I guess you already know. Yeah. So, basically, then follow them. They will guide you. This is a building in which we have the posters. So, hands-on two. So Morteza, you go with Morteza and Carlos. This is room 44, sorry, I'm tired. 004, 54, 004, I will make it. Hands on three. Yes, Alvaro, Marta, so you're with them. So you go to room 54005, hands on 5. So it's you?
It's 6. No, 6. And there are 4 too.
Hands-on 5 it's me.
Hands-on 5 is you, huh? Yeah, okay. So, but you haven't handed. So, you're with Jordi. You're alone, Jordi? Are you alone?
Yeah, today, yes.
Okay, so you with Jordi. And 54007, okay? And then hands-on 6. So, Giorgio and Domiti. So you're in room 54030. I'll come with you because you don't know the house. Or maybe you went already in the room. Okay, that's perfect. So on the web page of the VPH Summer School, where you have the program. If you scroll down, so you have all the detail of the program. So this will not be the same room every day, okay? And I think that even sometime in the same day, depending on whether it's before poster session or after poster session, the room might change. So check that. Ask the instructors if you're not sure, okay? So you're definitively in good hands. So you can go to the room with the instructors, and we see each other so at the poster session and coffee break in the building 54. Okay? Okay. Enjoy.